All right, good morning. Welcome back, everybody, from that quick break. My name is Logan Wong, and I'm excited to co-MC the forum this year. As your 22-year-old MC for the 21st Annual BC Natural Resources Forum, I'm excited to help guide you through the crucial conversations surrounding shaping tomorrow, BC's resource sector, and future generations. This year's forum emphasizes the significance of interconnected decision-making, forging meaningful partnerships between First Nations, government, and the BC resource sector. On behalf of the young people and young leaders in the room and around BC, thank you for including us in these important conversations. I would now like to invite Christine Jelowitz, Chief Executive Officer, Forest Professionals BC, the session sponsor, to introduce our next panel this morning.
Good morning, thanks for the intro. The forest profession is proud to sponsor this important discussion about forestry. And a little bit secretly, I'm also pretty proud that several of the panel members today include forest professionals. This year, we sponsored the session under the name Forest Professionals British Columbia. For 75 years, we operated under the name the Association of BC Forest Professionals, or ABCFP. Last spring, we started doing business as Forest Professionals British Columbia for an important reason that I wanted to share with you today. We want to be very clear that we're a provincial regulator, not an advocacy body, and the interests that we serve and protect is the public of BC. So to the audience today, full of business and government leaders in forestry and natural resources, forest professionals are already an important part of your workforce. By hiring registered forest professionals, you're helping your organization reduce environmental and operating risks, build social license, and importantly, follow the law. It's now my pleasure to introduce the session's two moderators. Coady is the current president and CEO of the BC Council of Forest Industries, an industry association representing forest companies in BC. Linda has been leading COFI since July of 2022. Co-moderating with Linda is Melissa Sanderson. Melissa works for the BC Ministry of Forests and is the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Timber, Range, and Economics Division. Please join us on the stage, Linda and Melissa.
Hear me okay? Okay, yes, you can. I'm going to ask our panelists to come on up, and we'll do a proper introduction. So thank you, Christine, and welcome everybody. I'm Coady. You just heard I'm with the BC Council of Forest Industries. I'm your co-moderator. And Melissa?
Yeah, is this thing on? Yeah. I am, as mentioned earlier, I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister.
Closer. Put it closer. Yeah.
Hello? Yeah, okay. As mentioned earlier, I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Forests, responsible for timber, range, and economics. I think before we begin, we want to take a moment to recognize the territory of the Clay Tenay, who we are gathered on today. And also, I'm going to turn over to Linda to introduce our four panelists.
Okay, Melissa, how did we end up on a panel with four guys?
I think we're kind of used to that, but I just want to say I'm pretty pleased that the weather cleared up and everyone was able to join us today. I was quite concerned, and looking at the weather in Vancouver, it might be challenging getting back, but I'm glad we're here today.
Okay, and we have Christine too. So the gender balance is here, folks. Otherwise, it would have been one or none if not for WestJet and Pacific Coastal. Yeah. So as Melissa says, we're really excited to have the panelists that we have with us here this morning. Their bios are online, and they are really well equipped to help us understand and navigate some of the challenges in the BC forest sector right now. And those of you who were at the dinner last night heard the Premier call out several of those challenges, including the current shortage in fiber supply. So please join me in welcoming Lennard Joe, who is the CEO of the BC First Nations Forestry Council, Bruce Blackwell, who's the principal with BA Blackwell and Associates, Stephane Renou, who is the president and CEO of FP Innovations, and Rick Jeffery, sorry, I got the order wrong there, president and CEO of the Canadian Wood Council.
Our topic this morning is building a BC forest sector roadmap to 2030. This topic was chosen because it's actually a task that the Provincial Forestry Forum is tackling right now. For those who may not be familiar with the PFF, for short, it is a forum made up of representatives from government, companies, and organizations from across the forest value chain in BC. It is where we come together as a group and a collective to discuss strategic forestry level issues with a cross-sector membership of senior leaders. It allows for a diversity of opinions and issues and opportunities to be raised, and we are to work together to build a strong, sustainable forest sector that works for everyone. And at the forum, I think Linda's going to get more into it, we are working to provide, we've been asked and tasked with providing recommendations on what a long-term sectoral strategy for the forest sector should look like in line with government's vision and mandate.
So this roadmap, the sectoral roadmap, as those of you who know in the energy and mining sectors, it can be to 2030 or 2035 or even as far as 2050. But the goal essentially is to develop multi-year pathways on where we want to go and how we want to get there. And certainly today in the BC forest sector, the reality is that what's happening day to day sucks up most of the time and the energy in the room. And carving out a space to take that long view can be challenging. Yet we all know if we don't have that long view, if we don't have some kind of North Star to guide us, it's easy to lose our way. So what we've asked our panelists, each of them to do today, is to provide a few milestones that could help us know whether we're moving backwards, forwards, or sideways towards 2030 or 2035.
I think it's important to note that none of this work is sort of starting from scratch here. A lot of people have been thinking about this for a lot of time, and some dies have already been cast. New directions, expectations, and intentions have already been set by government, First Nations, industry, labor, local communities, and others. We have spent quite a bit of time talking to British Columbians over the past few years about what they want to see, and I think there's some consistent themes that have emerged. Meaningful action on reconciliation with First Nations, and meaningful participation with communities interested in the forest sector and forest management. We want to remain globally competitive for products made in BC. We want to ensure we continue to get a fair return on our assets that are foundational to the sector. And they hear from the public they want to see more emphasis on sustainability and stewardship.
Okay, and just one more word from the two of us before we put our panelists in the spotlight here. Lenny, just give me a minute. Not to increase pressure on them, but there are a few other planes in the air right now, maybe not out of YVR, but there are a few other planes in the air that we're hoping their milestones can help get to a safe landing. And one, Melissa just mentioned, the new landscape level planning process is getting up and running in BC. You heard a lot last night and from speakers this morning on economic reconciliation. We want to open up new pathways for value added. And last but not least, as I mentioned earlier, we got to stabilize that fiber supply in the short term while some of these longer term policies get introduced.
Great, so I think we have painted enough of the big picture to ask our panelists to now step into it. We've given each of them an initial 5 minutes to present some of the milestones they see as critical to progress on 4 pathways that will shape the future of the forest sector in British Columbia. The first being First Nations leadership and participation. The second, wildfire resilience and forest health. Changing demand for wood products, and technology and innovation in biomaterials. And then we'll move into a broader discussion where we can take questions from the audience on the app. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Lenny from the First Nations Forestry Council.
Puxiam, Hansla, in squash shuk welsh tukla hin shaken tukla hin and tlakamakchin. Hadi, good morning. So I am Lenny Joe. My traditional name is Shuk Welsh, and I'm from the Shekink community located in the Intlakamak territory in the beautiful sunny Nicola Valley. It's really good to be here today in Prince George. It's really good to be part of in the territory of the Lake Tene and of the Dakal people. I was thinking about just how to talk about reconciliation in 5 minutes, right? And to talk about the milestones and how we are in forestry. And I wanted to start by just the reflection of where we were just last year. And we're talking about a roadmap to 2030, which is, not too far ahead. So what were we doing in 2018 is what we're going to be doing, and how long it'll take to get to where we are today, to where we'll be going in 2030. It was already reflected in this morning's. This is the 21st gathering, and 21 years ago, I would like to ask the question: how many nations were actually represented and invited, or even felt welcome to come into this room and share the dialogue? Very important dialogue that we need to do the work that we need to do. I would say there was less than there is today. I want to acknowledge the leadership and the First Nations presence in the room today, and also the energy that I feel and that I've seen and shared in just the opening. Reconciliation is it's a heavy word. There's a lot to it. How we move forward from it and where we go is going to take a lot of work. I liked some of the things that I heard this morning about reconciliation and changes to reconciliation. I liked what I seen about that if trust is not in the room, things are slower to move forward. So I thought about my milestones and what is reconciliation. I thought about six key steps, and we're already on the path. So the first step was acknowledging wrongdoing, right? And we've worked on this, and now we're in reconciliation. We have acts, we have DRIP, but we're having this process that's actually making it a law for us to work and carry on this level of responsibility. We talk about from there, we talk about restitution. We talk about that as compensation, not moving from just a monetary transaction, but compensation moving into a deeper facet. And everyone has their own idea of that. We talk about communication and dialogue, the dialogue that is needed to actually make the parts move, create some effectiveness and efficiencies. And through that, we go into this thing of rebuilding trust. There's a level of trust as you grow. Even when you meet someone new for the first time, you're actually already working on that trust equation. Last year, that's all I talked about. Credibility plus reliability plus intimacy divided by self-orientation. Just trust. And that was a real heavy subject, because that was needed to have these relationships so that we can move into collaboration and problem solving. You're starting to see the PFF, the Provincial Forestry Forum, value-added accelerators, old growth, everything that's happening on the ground operationally and legislatively for the transformation of forestry in BC. You're seeing that. Collaboration and problem solving, so that what we can do, and this is part of reconciliation, is creating sustainable change through integration and inclusion. What we're doing is not only restructuring governance, we're restructuring everything that is BC. What we've seen this morning is everything is connected. First Nations are tied very deeply to our traditional territories. Our roots are very deep. Through that, we've had our customs protocols and laws that reflect the natural laws of the land for the well-being of that land. And what we do is we are now finally in these rooms to be able to have that as part of the discussion, not have the discussion made for the best interest of us, but actually being part of that process. So this leads into where are we going for 2030? Not only is it on the ground legislative reform, because you need good legislation to have good operation. If it's not operationally functional on the ground, we have to take a look at the legislation. How will we move forward? So we are now at the table. There's a level of responsibility for that. And so through that is working together to develop this new relationship, identify the capacities so that we can get to this level of readiness for the well-being of our communities. And this is for everybody. First Nations, I said last year, at many of my talks, is that First Nations, we hold the responsibility for the well-being of everybody within our territories. And that includes the communities that have built up around us. Because if those communities are not healthy, then we're not healthy. And we're working very hard to get into that room of creating a healthy and vibrant British Columbia. So reconciliation, for me, the milestones are going to be partnerships and opportunities. And these partnerships and opportunities are there because through the reconciliation process, First Nations are, one, being shared decision makers. They're part of what's going to be the well-being of our communities. But number two, they're also going to start developing an economic presence. So one, we're going to be looking for investors. And number two, we are going to be investors. So with that, I'll pass on the mic, and we have a short amount of time. So
let's keep going here. Okay, so Bruce is going to talk about key milestones on the pathway to wildfire resilience and forest and community health and safety.
Thanks, Linda, and thanks, Lenny. I put this slide up here because I think it really tells the story of what we face. When we had the 2003 fire in Kelowna, and I participated with Gary Filman, assisting him in writing the first Filman report. The research said that climate change was going to result in an increasing amount of area burned, and that's worldwide. And clearly from this graphic, you can see over the last 4 decades that we're on this exponential pathway of increasing area burn. Now, that area burned isn't just a result of climate change. It's also a result of 100 years of successful fire suppression policy and a fuel grid that really is vulnerable to significant wildfire behavior during periods of drought and high fire danger. And so we've seen a trend of more fires, more area burned. And I think I was asked, well, what should be our goal? Well, our goal has to be to try to set this pathway in the opposite direction. We need to find a way to reduce the area burned. I think that should be our primary goal, and that will tie in with the other things that I have to say. Next slide, please. So there has been multiple people over multiple years that have called for more mitigation. And I think we need to start setting some targets for mitigation. And I think, in my mind, the original work that was done in 2004, 2005 said there were roughly 1 million hectares of high hazard areas that needed to be addressed around communities, but that expands well beyond communities into other areas of high risk, our power grid, our highways, our watersheds, and our, what I'll call our green timber supply, what's left of it, is still very vulnerable to fire moving forward. And we need to do something about that. And we can't just rely on responding to fires. Our fire suppression capabilities are almost maxed out, you can see from this last season. And how much more horsepower can we bring to that to really mitigate some of these fire impacts? And I think a key is historically, the forest industry was much more engaged in being part of that suppression effort. And I think with reconciliation, I think First Nations and the forest industry, through their harvesting practices, through their silviculture practices, need to be more engaged in managing this wildfire risk at the greater landscape. And I think that ties into the last bullet point that I have, is that the House is owned by government. Licensees, others practicing on the landscape need to be directed to do these things, and such that we promote all parties involved in the forest industry to incorporate risk reduction as a significant outcome of current forest management programs. I think that's key. That's not happening right now. Whether you look at licensees like BCTS, smaller licensees, we need to move those folks to do more about the risk profile as part of their forest management program. If we fail to act on some of these things, we will fail to address this problem. And I would suggest that the problem is still on an accelerating pathway, where we will see, I would say we've been lucky in British Columbia that we haven't had the impacts that other jurisdictions have had, which is really the loss of life. We had loss of life of firefighters this year. That's the first signal to me that we're still on the wrong pathway. The next pathway will be, there'll be entrapment in communities. There'll be entrapment in some isolated camp, whether it's oil and gas or whatever, or there'll be some indicator of significant loss of life. And if you follow fires around the world, that's already happened in Australia in past fire seasons. And we have been, it's happened in the US, and we have, as a province, as a country, to be honest, been very lucky that we haven't seen that kind of incident. So the seriousness of this is very real. And I think most people in this room know that, and I think most people know in this room that we need to do more. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Bruce. I'm going to turn over to Rick now to talk about the pathways for solid wood materials.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. So I'll start with the target that we've looked at. So currently in Canada, we spend about 13% of all costs in construction on wood products, and that's all the costs in construction. So that's structural materials, HVAC systems, the whole thing. We've set a target to go from 13% to 21%, and there's some profound ramifications of going there. But the first thing that I want to share with you is, well, why 21%? I'm a big believer in role modeling, and so we looked around the world and we looked at other forest jurisdictions and how much of their wood ended up in construction. And so when we looked at the Scandinavian countries, Finland, Sweden, those kinds of places, that's where they're at today. 21% of their total cost of construction is wood-based. And so we said, that's a really good idea. Why is it a good idea? Because it goes right back into the forest. It's vertical integration. So if we have more wood construction, then that's good for the forest industry, that's good for the forest, that's good for jobs, that's good for the economy. And so we've set that goal. And as you can see, trying to achieve that goal in British Columbia results in revenue gains. It results in more lumber being kept here in British Columbia. It increases the amount of cubic meters of building material in the built environment. And then on the market side, which is where we spend a lot of our time, that means going from 1,200 wood buildings a year to 2,200 wood buildings a year. So that's quite an increase. Those wood buildings tend to be multi-residential or non-residential buildings. And in Canada and in British Columbia, just so you know, on the residential side, about 65 to 70% of that is multi-residential. We're a very urban province, we're a very urban country. Land is expensive, and so what we see is less single-family housing and more multi-residential housing, and that multi-residential housing is going vertical. And so kudos to the BC government for a couple of policy changes they've made lately. They've just applied to the National Building Code process to go from 12 stories to 18 stories in wood. And they've also introduced this idea of transit hubs. And when you look at that legislation, you'll see that there's a lot of 6 to 18 floor buildings in those transit hubs. So really big opportunity to build more of that multi-residential out of wood. We currently have in the 1 to 6 floor space about 90% being wood-based, but anything above 6 floors we're, depending what it is, under 30%. So there's an opportunity there. Why is that important? Well, I always say to my oil and gas friends and my fossil fuel friends, you guys are great. You suck all the air out of the room when it comes to GHG reductions. That's what people want to talk about. But the built environment contributes 30% of the GHG emissions across the world. And so we have to decarbonize the built environment, and using wood is one of the opportunities we can do for that. It also means this target that we move from 7,000 single-family home to 9,500 per year. That's also important. Canada is facing an existential housing crisis right now. We currently build about 250,000 housing units a year. In order to get to affordability, we have to be building 750,000. So we got to triple our production. And at the same time, we're facing labor shortages for carpenters, engineers, all of those kinds of folks. And so we have to figure out how we can start to build more housing stock, and wood's going to play a very important role there, and it's embedded in this goal. What's the ramifications of this? First of all, there's a very good carbon reduction story there. So if we follow on this pathway, hit this kind of threshold, that'll remove 4.5 million tons of carbon out of the environment in British Columbia per year. It's a pretty big number. It also provides an opportunity on the value-added side for a couple things. One is for new mass timber facilities, which lots of people talk about value-added. That's one of the value-added pathways we have available here to us today. So there's that. The second thing is on that housing piece is because we have labor shortages, we're going to have to start to think about how we do off-site modular construction for homes. And so there's a real economic opportunity there. I'll just end by saying I've just spent 2 weeks before Christmas in Europe, in Central Europe. It is the place where mass timber found its origin. I went and talked to all of the big mass timber producers and all of the big modular home producers. And I was struck by this thought. They embarked upon their journey 15 years ago. The sawmilling industry kind of looked around and said, this is a tough business, the market's changing, where are we going next? And 15 years ago, they made that transition to move into and up the value chain and vertically integrate their operations from being sawmills to being mass timber producers and housing providers. I looked at it, and I looked at our circumstance here in Canada and here in British Columbia, and went, we are at that inflection point that they were 15 years ago, and they've made the transition. And so there's a lot that we can learn from them. My colleague Stephane will talk about this, but we don't need to do innovation here in this space. We need to go and adapt and adopt what other people have done, because they've taken the journey. And so there's lots to learn from them, and I'm very positive and hopeful that we're going to also be able to make that journey. And it ties back to what Bruce was saying, because if we start to manage our forests, to manage for fire, that's going to create fiber. It's going to create fiber for the bioeconomy, and it's going to create fiber for us to be able to use in these in this housing and mass timber opportunity that we have in front of us. And we're going to be doing that with our First Nations partners. And we had a couple of First Nations along with us, Lenny, on the tour, and they were looking at housing opportunities and how they could get into that housing business. And so when you think about that, starting to think about off-site modular types of construction to provide housing for the nations, provide housing for British Columbians, there's a great opportunity. So we think that those two, the carbon piece, the housing piece, are creating a very good opportunity here in British Columbia that will allow us to go from 13% to 21%.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Stephane, over to you then on the pathway. Pulp, paper, bioeconomy, energy, bring it home.
All right, so I'm supposed to be a CEO, but I think I prefer nerd in chief. I'm a technologist. I do innovation, I do science. Here's the funny thing. So we laid out on this slide here for you all the projects we're working out across the forest ecosystem in terms of innovation, invention, research, etc. I put a little color code in there. So attracted to red, as your eye is normally, red is what we call rocket science, is invention, it's new stuff. There's not a lot of red. Why? Because a lot of the invention have been done. It's on the shelf, ready for the pickup, ready for the innovation, which is just taking that science, taking that invention, making it real. So it's not about a lot of new ideas, it's about making them happen. So what do we need for that? Well, we need capital investments. We need to commit, to go forward, redo what others have done in other countries and make it happen for real here. So what's the path to that? What's the path to that fabulous bioeconomy? 3-step. First step. Well, relaunch, I call it relaunch the data because I want to be nice to everybody, but it's fiber certainty. You cannot build on something which is unstable. If I'm not sure if I got matter to work with, then it goes into my economic risk and it doesn't worth it. That's number one. I'm not going to dive too much on that. Linda, Melissa, you're having a lot of healthy dialogue there. I'll let you have them. Let's go now to the solid base. The forest industry is extremely well integrated, vertically integrated or through different companies. We harvest, we sawmill, we take the residue from the sawmill, we make pulp, and then we take residues from there, we can extract chemicals from there to make bioproduct potentially. If one of those steps fall apart, their chain fall apart. If pulp and paper mill close, sawmill close. That's step 2. You need to rebuild a solid base. If you look at the index of competitivity of the pulp mill in Canada overall, and in BC in particular, we're down the chain. We haven't built a modern mill in Canada since whatever. If you look at the competitiveness of the Nordic mills, they are there. Do they have rocket science technology? No, they don't. They just brought their engineering to 2020, 2010 and left the 1960. Furthermore, there's a few things that are certain in life, and if you are in a pulp mill, in a kraft mill, it's called corrosion. It's gonna get you. It's gonna get to your equipment, and you're gonna fight for the life of the mill. We're there on several mills today. Now, the bioeconomy, fabulous, fantastic, a lot of new product that can be done. It's always based on using extract from other process, other part of the industry. Any bioproduct you make, which is coming from either lignin, sugars, or whatever else, is gonna have to beat something, oil. The price of extracting product from oil is this, the price for extracting products from trees is that. Policy, partnership are essential for the bioeconomy to work. There is no magic coming in. A lot of technology need to be done, a lot of innovation need to be done. But we need a modern mill now in Canada. It will happen in America. Let's make it north of the border. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Stephane. So many thanks to all of our panelists for their presentations. We're going to shift gears here a little bit and open up some discussion. Linda and I have a few questions. I'm also noting the time and wanting to make sure the audience has a chance to have their questions addressed. But before we start, I want to ask our panelists, do you have anything you want to ask one another? Lenny does. I can tell. Go for it.
No, I'm just really glad that we actually have a diverse panel, but all men, and I acknowledge that too, Linda. But a diverse panel that actually has things, and you can actually see the linkage right from the start to the last, and I thought that was really good to have that, just to show that the connections. And Stephane, how you ended up saying, number one on the step is if we don't have sustainable forestry, then how do we go further, right? How do we get everything else?
Yeah, lady, if I can go on your comment, right? So you will have a lot of dialogue about volume, etc. But what we really need is certainty. What is certain? Because if you go to the bank to have a capital investment, you need to tell them that your business plan works. And a lot of business plans now in the forestry system don't work because that piece is the higher risk piece. And then you will start factoring economical factor that make your plan collapse. Same thing on the sustainability part, Lenny. If you don't get that part of the equation correct, we're off as well. So we need to find that balance quick. That's the important point.
Yeah, just, on the mass timber piece and the modular home piece, it was really interesting when I talked to these companies in Central Europe. I said, hey, where do you get your fiber supply? Oh, it's within 80 to 100 kilometers of us. What's the cost of your fiber supply? Oh, it's about 120 euros a cubic meter. Where are your customers? Your customers are, within Central Europe. How many customers do you have? 2,000 or so. It's a different business. And then the big question I asked them was, well, how much does it cost to build a mass timber facility? Well, it's 1,000 euros per 1,000 square meters of production. And their production facilities there are large. They're producing 300,000 cubic meters of CLT and mass timber products in any particular plant. So you're looking at $200 million to build a proper mass timber facility. If you're going to make a $200 million investment, you've got to know that you have the fiber available. You have to know what your cost structures are. And, the Wood Council, we're building the market. The market is there, and it's emerging. And so what we need to do is build that trust, get in the partnerships, do our forest management in a sustainable manner, in a fire-safe manner. That provides the material that can be put into these facilities, into the bio facilities. So there's a virtuous path there. And so, this panel was asked to kind of chart out and say, well, what does that path look like? And so you can see the path. We just now need to go, how are we going to, what's the catalyst? How are we going to get there?
Go ahead, Stephane, and then we're going to pick up a few questions from the audience. And Bruce, it looks like wildfires are at the top of the list of questions from the audience. So.
Yeah, I'll just make a comment, right? I mean, talk about the family, right? We're all together, we all link. And it's fun for me to be at this conference because I rediscover a lot of old friends from the oil sector, so-called energy sector. Well, the energy sector is actually where a lot of the technology for bioproduct are. The chemistry used in the oil sector is no different than what you will do when you decompose wood into lignin and sugars. There's natural alliance we can do between the two sectors if our goal is sustainability in link with the forest. So I'm just opening the hand. We can extend that family to the oil sector. I don't need to reinvent what have been invented by the oil sector and you're really good at. The partnership between the two industries is a path forward that we should consider.
Okay, Bruce, wildfire, and a few questions there about salvage after wildfire, and I know there's some new rules and regs coming out from the province on that, but it's time-limited opportunity. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, first on the salvage issue, I just did some research for a client on salvage in British Columbia and compared that to some other jurisdictions. One of the constraints of salvage is you have to think about ecological services, you have to think about habitat. But we haven't been focusing on changes to areas that have burned. Many of these areas leave a lot of biomass post-fire, and that biomass gradually decays, goes to the ground, it gets integrated with new trees and grasses particularly, which actually creates a very significant opportunity for a reburn. So from a fire point of view, we could see reburns of some of these big fires that have not been salvaged within 50 to 20 years. And that's been happening in Washington State, it's happened in California. There's evidence for a reburn policy. We're losing the fiber opportunity, generally speaking, within 1 year. If we can't plan and execute to harvest and salvage that damaged fiber, it degrades very quickly over time. So when you compare the permitting opportunities in Alberta, it's about 60 days. And their biggest limitation is the fire is still burning, usually when they're ready to salvage. In speaking with different folks here in BC, some of the bigger licensees, some are having great success, but others are not getting that salvage opportunity for a year and a half, and the value of the fiber is being lost. And my understanding is we could probably contribute a significant amount of fiber to the AAC that needs salvage. And the number I've been told is roughly about 5 million cubic meters. Well, that's substantive. So I think we need to put in more effort and energy into thinking about the salvage opportunity, permitting and making it happening, particularly in those areas that are sensitive to this potential for a reburn. It's kind of a win-win. Recognizing there are a lot of ecological benefits for leaving certain forest types to stand and contribute to biodiversity. It's a balance. So we've got to think this through logically, and we've got to think it carefully and base it on science.
I want to add to that too, is that through the wildfires, this is, we should have just did the topic just on wildfires, and we could have added everything that we're talking with each and everyone here. But it's really that level of readiness that we have. We know that there's going to be another wildfire. We know that there's going to be recovery and salvage opportunities that need to be done. We have to hit the ground. Hydrophobic soils, runoff, other environmental damages that happen post-wildfire are just one thing, but also getting on the ground within that 1 year. So how do we create that level of readiness to actually hit that switch, the consultation with First Nations and the readiness to actually approach and deal with wildfires is there. The fiber utilization opportunities with wood breakdown facilities and even right down to the pulp and paper, right? And the use of what can we do and create that. So I think that is good, because right now we are now in these rooms this past year through different working groups to collaborate and solve these problems.
I think the next question is also very interesting. How is forest management adapting to increasing frequency and intensity of fires? Well, really, the interesting component of change is that it's really the fine fuels that contribute to the ignition and spread of wildfires. And when we talk about fine fuels, I like to describe them as 12.5 centimeters metric, 6 inches imperial, but that's the material that contributes to the ignition and spread of wildfire. We need to find a way, in our fire-prone ecosystems where we've had ingrowth or encroachment of fuels into the landscape, that material is generally less than 15 centimeters. Well, that's that fine fuel that if it dies from competitive mortality or insects, it creates a fuel bed that is very susceptible to burning quickly. In concert with what Stephane's been talking about, we need to utilize that fiber. We need to retrieve that fiber as part of our forest harvesting, and we need to integrate it into the bioeconomy. All these things are linked. If we don't do this, we're going to have more fires, we're going to have less fiber. Stephane?
Absolutely. And you think, I'm always amazed when you have the season of fire to see how much the forest industry is involved. They are the one going in, make roads. They are the one protecting the community by making trenches. They have the machinery to process. Going after that fiber is key. Managing the forest up front to avoid, to protect communities is going to be key as well. We shall not be shy of retrieving fiber to protect communities. Now, let's talk about, I see some stuff about slash piles and why don't we go get that wood, et cetera, et cetera. When you look at the cost, wood, fiber, pulp, what's the highest portion of that cost? Transport. Transport is the key. Transport is the killer. Do you think our company don't like to make money? They do, actually. But it's when transport is getting so expensive that if you go get that wood, you're losing money. That's why we need this readjustment. And I'm not going to go negotiate that. I'm just going to say it's an actual mathematical accounting fact. You can look at all the costs, and the cost of getting the fiber is the key cost we need to find ways to get better at. So I will put on the table that all the forests should not be managed the same way. We have this notion that all forests should be natural and go in and just do the same thing everywhere. What about we manage different sections differently for communities, for wood harvest, for biodiversity? If we start thinking less about dogma and be a bit more rational about what we do where, maybe we have a chance to get there.
So we're running out of time here, Melissa. So there's one question that's popped up to the top, which I'll summarize by saying, show me the money. How are we going to attract the investment that's required to do some of the things that each one of these panelists has been talking about, which are all great and we know would be very well supported by the majority of British Columbia? Rick, how are we going to attract money to the value added, to the engineered wood products?
Yeah, sure. So, there's two aspects to that. One's the supply side, one's the demand side. So on the demand side, we need to continue to drive these kinds of policies that influence the market, to have the market want to build with wood. So again, just going back to reducing, decarbonizing the built environment, as that gains traction, whether it's through government procurement, government policy, ESG, more and more effort is going to be used or put to increase the amount of wood in the built environment. And so we'll drive that demand. And so when the demand's there, then the companies will look and go, oh, there's the market. There's where the market's going. What does that market look like? So that's the demand side. On the supply side, I just go back to what Stephane said, is we need to look and see where is that fiber, what's the cost of the fiber, or what's the reliability of that fiber. And again, not to belabor it, but it was really interesting in Central Europe. They got their fiber, these mills from 80 to 100 kilometers within the location of their mills. And these weren't small mills. They were half a billion board foot mills. And where did that fiber come from? Well, first of all, it was some of the most beautiful wood I'd ever seen. It was spruce. It was 80 or 90 years old. The lumber that they were cutting out of it was square edged, very high quality. And I said, well, how does that work, and how reliable is your fiber supply? And your fiber supply is very close. How does that work? And essentially what they've done is they've got a management regime there where they go in and pre-commercial thin Bruce. So that's where you can go in and get rid of those fines, get rid of that material, get it over to Stephane. And then they go in and they commercial thin, and they get some fiber at the commercial thinning stage. And then they go in again at the end and they get, this beautiful 90-year-old fiber, and they just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And they've been doing it for a couple hundred years. And so they've got that certainty. They don't own the land. It's private land. Some of it's crown land, but they know the fiber's there. They know the quality of the fiber, and it's a pretty uniform fiber base. And so that's how they can then turn around and say, I'm going to go from being a sawmiller to add some value in my operations, and let's put in a $200 million CLT plants, or let's, go and build the modular homes. So that's the kind of thing that we need to be looking at, and I think that opportunity is here for us right now. And it's being driven by fires, it's being driven by decarbonization, it's being now driven by this housing crisis.
Great, thanks, Rick. I think we're at time. I just want to thank all of our panelists today. I think it shows the depth and complexity of the forest sector, and I think you provide some valuable insights and perspectives. I think we could have gone on for quite some time, but I think some of us are going to be around the conference, so feel free to come up and talk to us. I also want to thank our audience for your interest and participation. We got a lot of great questions and engagement on how the BC forest sector could move forward. So thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you, Melissa and Linda, for your moderation, and thank you to our speakers. I'd now like to invite Kim Logan, Vice President, Partnerships and Strategy, iTotem, to the stage to thank our speakers.
Thanks, Logan, my namesake. On behalf of iTotem Analytics, I would like to thank the panel. iTotem Analytics works with clients from the not-for-profit sector, different levels of government, industry groups, and companies to transform data into trust. And we know that data and information is essential to facilitate the discussions, collaboration, and conversations like the one that we just had today, to really support a high level of trust. And trust, as we heard Lenny say, really is the fuel that will drive progress and drive action in the sector. So super important conversation. And just wanted to thank all of the panelists for your insights, Linda and Melissa for moderating the panel, Bruce, Stephane, Rick, and Lenny for their tremendous insights. We know that when there is uncertainty, that is effectively a drag on trust. So I appreciate all of the work that you're doing to steer the sector towards 2030, developing a roadmap, and really thinking about the future of the industry and how important it is to communities. I heard mention of the term, the bioeconomy, and I think that's indicative of the transformation that is happening in the sector. So please join me in thanking the panel for their insights today.
Thank you, Kim. I'd like to ask everybody once again just to join me in thanking the speakers on behalf of the 2024 BC Natural Resources Forum. Please accept a small gift to thank you all for your participation today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we're going to get it forward.
And now, everybody, it's time to enjoy a short networking break while our amazing Civic Center staff prepare the room for lunch. Our lunch will begin promptly at 12:20 and is sponsored by the Prince Rupert Port Authority. For those who did not purchase a lunch ticket, there are a number of restaurants within a short walk of the Civic Center, and we encourage you all to take a look at those. If you purchased a boxed lunch, these can be picked up at the back of the trade show in Auditorium 103. Those on the wait list to get into the lunch are asked to be available near the registration desk, as we will call your name as seats become available. And with that, we now ask you to please move swiftly out of the room to allow our amazing Civic Center staff to flip the room for lunch. Thank you very much.